My son staged my funeral to get my inheritance, thinking I was dead for good. The guests mourned while he hid his smile, counting millions. But when I walked into my own funeral, everyone turned pale with shock, and my son ran away like a thief. I stopped him and whispered, "You're missing the best part." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps. I tapped my platinum card against the reception desk, checking my Rolex for the third time in 2 minutes. Jet lag mixed with whatever bug I'd picked up in Berlin was making my patience thinner than hospital coffee. "Sir, if you could just complete these forms." "Look, I don't have time for bureaucracy." My voice carried the authority of a man who'd built a $50 million electronics empire from nothing. "I flew back from Europe yesterday. I feel like hell, and I need to see a doctor now, not in an hour. Now." The middle-aged administrator, Patricia Cole according to her nameplate, typed with the enthusiasm of someone counting down to retirement. Her fingers clicked across the keyboard like a woodpecker attacking metal. "Name and date of birth, please." "Orrin Howell, March 15th, 1968. Click, click, click. Then silence. Patricia's face changed. Color drained from her cheeks as she stared at her monitor. She looked at me, then back at the screen, then at me again. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be some kind of error in our system." "What kind of error?" I leaned forward, expensive leather shoes squeaking against linoleum. "Well," she swallowed hard, "according to our records, you're deceased." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me. It shows here that you died on April 10th, 5 days ago." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There's a death certificate on file." My legs felt unsteady. The antiseptic smell suddenly seemed overwhelming. "That's impossible. I'm standing right here." Patricia's hands trembled as she scrolled through screens. "The certificate was filed by—" She paused, squinting at the monitor. "Leland Howell, listed as next of kin. My son. Show me." My voice came out rougher than sandpaper. She hesitated, then reached into a filing cabinet. Paper rustled as she pulled out a manila folder. Inside was an official California death certificate, with my name typed in block letters. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Location, Munich, Germany. "But sir, you're obviously alive. This must be some kind of mistake." "No mistake." The pieces clicked together with mechanical precision. Leland had access to my medical records. He knew my travel schedule. He'd been asking about my will just last month, claiming it was for family planning. I snatched the certificate, studying the forged signature that looked convincingly like mine. Every detail was perfect, except for one crucial fact. I was breathing. "I need a copy of this." Patricia fumbled with the copier, her hands shaking. "Mr. Howell, we should probably call the police. This is fraud, identity theft." "Not yet." I folded the copy into my jacket pocket. "I need to understand what's happening first." Walking toward the exit, my mind raced through possibilities. Leland thought I was dead. He'd filed papers, probably started inheritance procedures. The inheritance worth $50 million. My own son had killed me on paper. The automatic doors slid open and California sunlight hit my face. Somewhere in this city, people were probably planning my funeral, while my supposed heir counted his premature windfall. Time to prove that rumors of my death had been greatly exaggerated. The 30-minute drive home passed in a blur of rage and disbelief. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, the death certificate burning like acid in my jacket pocket. By the time I pulled into my Pacific Heights driveway, the shock had crystallized into something colder, more dangerous. Inside my study, I poured coffee with shaking hands. The ceramic mug felt foreign, as if I was handling it from beyond the grave. Family photos lined my mahogany desk. Leland's graduation from Stanford, our fishing trip to Alaska, his first day at the company. In every picture, he wore that same charming smile that had fooled me for 32 years. I unlocked my filing cabinet with mechanical precision. Important documents were missing. My medical proxy forms, insurance papers, banking authorizations. All had required my signature. All had been in this cabinet 3 weeks ago when I'd left for Europe. The coffee grew cold as I reconstructed the timeline. I departed for Berlin on March 28th. Leland had my house keys, knew my travel schedule, understood exactly when I'd be unreachable in foreign time zones. He'd had 3 weeks to plan this elaborate grave robbery. My phone sat silent on the desk. No missed calls. No concerned messages from friends or business partners. If Leland had announced my death 5 days ago, someone should have tried to contact me. The silence felt orchestrated, calculated. Opening my laptop, I accessed Leland's employee records from our company database. His salary was generous, $200,000 annually. But I'd noticed some concerning signs lately. Expensive watches, a new Tesla, mentions of Vegas trips, a man living beyond his means. I scrolled through financial statements, connecting dots that should have been obvious. Leland's credit cards were maxed out. He'd borrowed against his 401k twice. 3 months ago, he'd asked about early inheritance options, claiming he wanted to buy a house. The house story was fiction. He needed money fast, and $50 million in life insurance plus company assets would solve his gambling debts permanently. All he needed was a death certificate and a few months to establish legal claim before anyone questioned the details. Clever, ruthless, completely underestimating his supposedly dead father. I studied his photo from last year's company picnic. Dark hair, confident smile, wearing the Armani suit I'd bought him for his promotion. He looked like me at that age, ambitious, hungry, willing to take risks. But I'd built something with my risks. He was just stealing. My reflection stared back from the computer screen, pale from illness, older than I felt, but very much alive. Leland had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed I'd stay dead long enough for his plan to work. Standing up, I paced around the study. Leather-bound law books watched from their shelves like silent judges. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking time I'd supposedly run out of 5 days ago. Outside, voices drifted through the window, neighbors talking in hushed tones. I moved toward the sound, catching fragments of conversation about poor Orrin, and so sudden. Black clothing flashed between the hedge. They were dressed for a funeral. My funeral. 9:15 the next morning, and someone was crying on my front porch. I'd spent the night planning, drinking instant coffee, and staring at that death certificate until the words blurred together. Sleep had been impossible. Dead men don't need rest anyway. The doorbell rang twice, followed by muffled voices. I opened the door to find Letitia Green and her husband Barney standing on my steps, both dressed in formal black funeral attire. Letitia held a small bouquet of white lilies. They saw me and froze. Letitia's scream could have shattered windows. "Ghost! Oh, my lord, it's a ghost!" Barney staggered backward, his face turning the color of old newspaper. "Sweet Jesus, Orrin, we thought you were dead?" I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. "So I've heard." Letitia pressed her hand to her chest, breathing like she'd run a marathon. At 70, she was built like a sparrow, but had the lung capacity of an opera singer. But Leland said he told everyone, "Your heart gave out in Germany." Leland said a lot of things, apparently. I kept my voice calm, controlled. These neighbors had been kind to me for 15 years. They didn't deserve to be caught in my son's web of lies. "When did he make this announcement?" Barney found his voice, though it cracked like a teenager's. "Yesterday morning. Called the whole neighborhood, crying his eyes out. Said you'd collapsed in your hotel, that he was flying your body home for burial." "Flying my body home?" The phrase tasted bitter. "Where's this burial supposed to happen?" "Colma Cemetery," Letitia whispered, still staring at me like I might vanish. "The service starts at 10:30 this morning. We were just heading there now." 10:30. I checked my watch. 9:20. My own funeral was starting in 70 minutes, and I was standing here in pajamas and a bathrobe, very much alive and increasingly angry. "Who else knows about this?" "Everyone," Barney said. "Your business partners, the country club folks, half of Pacific Heights. Leland posted it on social media, sent formal announcements. There's going to be hundreds of people there." Hundreds of people mourning a man who was drinking coffee 20 feet away. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Leland. Did he say anything else? About inheritance? About the company? Letitia nodded eagerly. Gossip was her specialty, and this was the story of a lifetime. "He mentioned having to handle your affairs, something about insurance paperwork being complicated because you died overseas. said it might take months to sort everything out. Months. Enough time to establish legal claims, transfer assets, disappear with my life's work. He'd thought of everything except the possibility that his victim might read his own obituary. Listen to me carefully. I stepped closer, using the voice that had closed million-dollar deals. You saw nothing here this morning. You spoke to no one. You never saw me alive, understand? They nodded like bobblehead dolls. Go to the funeral. Act surprised by nothing. If anyone asks unusual questions, you know nothing beyond what Leland told you. But Oren, Letitia's voice shook. Shouldn't we tell people you're alive? This is fraud. This is my problem to solve. I softened my tone slightly. Trust me. By this afternoon, everyone will know the truth. But it has to happen the right way. Barney grabbed his wife's arm. Come on, Letitia. We'll be late. They hurried down my front steps, Letitia looking back twice as if I might disappear. Their car doors slammed, and they drove away toward my funeral. I had an hour and 10 minutes to get dressed, drive to Colma Cemetery, and crash my own burial service. Time to resurrect myself properly. Back inside my house, I closed the front door with deliberate force. The sound echoed through the hallway like a judge's gavel. 15 minutes remained before my son would stand over my casket, accepting condolences with practiced sorrow. Time enough to understand exactly what I was dealing with. My study felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a war room. I flipped the family photographs face down on my mahogany desk. Leland's Stanford graduation smile could watch from the shadows. Opening my laptop, I accessed Howell-Tech's financial systems with keystrokes that had become muscle memory over 2 decades. The company was worth exactly $100 million according to our latest quarterly report. Healthy profit margins, strong market position, succession plans that named Leland as primary heir to both corporate assets and personal estate. $50 million in personal inheritance, the magic number that made patricide worth the risk. My filing cabinet yielded more disturbing evidence. Leland's employment file contained copies of documents he shouldn't have possessed, medical proxy forms, banking authorizations, legal powers of attorney. I'd given him temporary access before leaving for Europe, trusting him to handle routine business correspondence. Trust. The word tasted bitter now. His credit reports painted a devastating picture. Casino markers from Las Vegas, Atlantic City, online gambling platforms. The debts had accelerated dramatically over 6 months. $2.3 million in total obligations. Interest compounding daily. Collection agencies circling like vultures. A desperate man with access to his father's legal documents, and a $50 million inheritance hanging in the balance. The timeline fit perfectly with my European business trip, when I'd be unreachable for days at a time, dealing with different time zones and international communications. Clever boy, he'd researched death certificate procedures, understood that filing in California while claiming death occurred in Germany would create bureaucratic delays. Enough time to establish legal claims, transfer assets, disappear with the money before anyone questioned the details too carefully. The wall clock showed 9:45. 30 minutes until showtime. I pulled up Leland's bank statements on screen. Massive cash withdrawals over the past month. Down payments to bookies, probably. His checking account balance showed negative $4,000. A man drowning in debt, grabbing for a $50 million life preserver. My coffee had gone stone cold, but I barely noticed. The businessman in me admired the audacity, even as the father felt the knife twist deeper. Leland had inherited my strategic thinking along with my stubborn determination. Unfortunately, he'd chosen to use those gifts for fraud instead of building something legitimate. Standing up, I grabbed my car keys from the desk drawer. The Mercedes waited in the garage, ready for a resurrection appearance that would make Lazarus look like an amateur. My son was about to discover that reports of my death had been greatly exaggerated, and that the penalty for premature inheritance was higher than he'd calculated. The garage door rolled up as I backed my silver Mercedes onto the street. Pacific Heights looked peaceful in the morning light, expensive houses hiding expensive secrets behind manicured hedges. I connected my phone to the car's system and dialed Donald's office while navigating toward Highway 280. Barney, Goldman and Associates. This is Donald. Donald, it's Orrin. I need your immediate attention on something rather urgent. Silence stretched for 5 seconds. Then, Orrin? But I thought... Leland called yesterday saying you died in Germany. Heart attack in Munich. Leland said many things. All of them lies. I merged into southbound traffic, following signs toward Colma. I'm very much alive, and my son has committed fraud on a spectacular scale. This is impossible. I saw the death certificate filing in the county database yesterday evening. Official paperwork, proper signatures, forged signatures, stolen documents. $2 million in gambling debts provided the motive. A delivery truck cut me off, and I smoothly changed lanes. Donald, I need you to file emergency fraud charges immediately. Civil lawsuit, criminal referral, whatever stops him from accessing inheritance funds. Computer keys clicked rapidly in the background. I'm pulling up the case files now. The death certificate shows... Wait, this signature looks off. The pressure points are wrong, and the handwriting analysis software is flagging inconsistencies. Because I didn't sign it. I was drinking beer in a Berlin hotel when that document was supposedly notarized in Munich. My legal assistant mentioned something yesterday about expedited inheritance procedures. Leland requested fast-track processing due to international complications. Donald's voice sharpened with professional anger. The scheming little bastard played our firm like a violin. Traffic slowed as we approached the cemetery exit. Dozens of cars lined the road ahead. My funeral procession creating a traffic jam on Highway 280. How quickly can you file injunctions? I'm already drafting paperwork, emergency hearing request, asset freeze, fraud investigation. Judge Martinez owes me favors from the Peterson case last year. Paper rustled through the phone speaker. But Orrin, this is going to be messy. Media attention, family scandal, business implications. Let it be messy. Leland chose this battlefield when he decided to kill his father for money. Where are you right now? I turned into the cemetery parking lot, counting at least 40 vehicles scattered across the asphalt. Black sedans, luxury SUVs, even a few limousines. Leland had orchestrated quite a production. Arriving at my own funeral, Colma Cemetery, about to make an entrance that'll give everyone present something to remember. Jesus Christ, Orrin, think about this. Crashing your own funeral could backfire legally. Let me handle this through proper channels. Proper channels take time. Every minute Leland maintains this charade strengthens his legal position. I parked between a black Cadillac and a white Mercedes hearse. File your paperwork. I'll handle the dramatic revelation. This could traumatize people, elderly relatives, business associates. Leland should have considered that before committing fraud. Through my windshield, I could see mourners gathering near the chapel entrance. Dark suits, black dresses, flowers, and tears. All for a man sitting in a car 50 yards away, very much alive and increasingly angry. Call me after you've filed the injunctions. This afternoon we plan Leland's complete destruction. I hung up and stepped into the April morning, straightening my tie and walking toward the stone chapel, where my son was about to receive the shock of his miserable life. The chapel parking lot buzzed with subdued conversation and rustling black fabric. 47 cars by my count. Impressive turnout for a man whose death was entirely fictional. I recognized faces from the country club, business associates from Silicon Valley, even a few competitors who'd probably attended, hoping to pick over Howell-Tech's corporate remains. Walking across the asphalt, I adopted the confident stride that had intimidated boardrooms for 2 decades. Gray clouds hung low over Colma, casting everything in appropriate funeral lighting. Someone had spared no expense on floral arrangements. The chapel's heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar. Organ music drifted through the gap, something appropriately somber that I didn't recognize. Through the windows I glimpsed a packed interior, every pew occupied by mourners paying respects to my allegedly deceased self. Time for the resurrection. I grasped the brass door handle and pulled firmly. The hinges creaked with satisfying drama as the doors swung wide, revealing the entire assembled congregation from behind. The organ music stopped mid-note. Heads turned in a wave from back to front, like dominoes falling in reverse. Recognition spread through the crowd with mathematical precision, first confused squinting, then shocked gasps, then outright screams. Margaret Suttleson from the golf club fainted directly into her husband's lap. 3 elderly women in the third row grabbed their purses and pressed backward against the pews as if I might contaminate them with my undead presence. "Evening, everyone." My voice carried easily through the suddenly silent chapel. "Sorry I'm late to my own funeral." The chaos that followed resembled a disaster movie. People scrambled over each other toward the side exits, programs and flowers scattered across the floor. Someone's grandmother shrieked continuously in a pitch that could shatter crystal. But my attention focused entirely on the front row, where Leland stood frozen beside my supposedly occupied casket. My son's face had drained to the color of old newspaper. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool April morning. His expensive black suit, probably purchased with borrowed money, hung awkwardly on his trembling frame. For a moment, we stared at each other across 50 feet of chaos. Father and son, victim and perpetrator, the living and the supposedly dead. Leland's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. No sound emerged. I began walking down the center aisle, each footstep echoing against stone walls. The crowd parted before me, people pressing against the pews as if I carried some contagious disease. Whispered prayers and confused exclamations followed in my wake. "Hello, son!" My voice cut through the pandemonium with surgical precision. "Surprised to see me?" Leland's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of my casket for support, irony so thick you could slice it with a knife. The funeral director, a thin man with nervous hands, approached from the side. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening here. We have a death certificate. Legal documentation. You have fraud?" I kept walking, never breaking eye contact with Leland. "Forged documents. A son so desperate for inheritance money that he decided to kill his father on paper." 20 feet away now, close enough to see the panic in Leland's eyes, the way his hands shook as he realized his carefully constructed lie was collapsing in real time. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain?" I stopped directly in front of him, close enough to smell his fierce sweat. "Explain how you stole my medical documents. Explain 2 million in gambling debts. Explain why you thought I'd stay dead long enough for you to cash in." The chapel had gone completely silent except for muffled sobs from the back rows. Every eye in the building focused on our family drama playing out beside my empty casket. Leland opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Leland's eyes darted toward the chapel's side exit like a cornered animal calculating escape routes. His expensive black suit hung loosely on his trembling frame, sweat beading across his forehead despite the cool April air. "Don't even think about it." My voice carried the authority that had commanded boardrooms for 3 decades. "Stay exactly where you are, son." He froze mid-step, one hand still gripping my casket for support. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, my supposedly grieving heir using my coffin as a crutch, while facing his very much alive father. The chapel had gone silent except for Margaret Suttleson's continued whimpering from the third row. 47 pairs of eyes tracked between us like spectators at a tennis match, waiting to see who would break first. "Dad, please, I can explain everything." "Explain?" I walked to the front podium, placing my hands on the lectern where someone had planned to deliver my eulogy. "Explain how you forged medical documents while I was drinking beer in Berlin. Explain $2.3 million in casino debts. Explain why you filed my death certificate 5 days before I even knew I was sick." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson from the country club clutched her pearls, like they might protect her from the family scandal unfolding before her eyes. Leland's face cycled through emotions faster than a slot machine. Panic, denial, calculation, desperation. "The debts aren't that much." "You're exaggerating." "Bank of America disagrees. So does Caesar's Palace, the Bellagio, and about 6 online gambling platforms." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the screenshots I'd taken that morning. "Want me to read the exact figures? With interest calculations?" His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. In the fluorescent chapel lighting, he looked older than his 32 years, worn down by months of living beyond his means, and deeper in debt with each desperate bet. "You had access to my medical proxy forms," I continued, my voice echoing off stone walls. "You knew my travel schedule, my insurance policies, my banking authorizations, everything you needed to declare me dead and start collecting inheritance payments." "That's not..." I never meant, his voice cracked like a teenager caught stealing. You never meant to get caught. I stepped closer, close enough to smell his fear sweat mixing with expensive cologne. The plan was elegant, I'll give you that. File the death certificate while I'm overseas. Establish legal claims before anyone questions the details. Disappear with $50 million before your father's body makes it home from Germany. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Business associates whispered among themselves, calculating the professional implications. Family friends looked between shock and disgust, watching a son destroy his father's reputation for money. Except I didn't die. My voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried throughout the chapel. Inconvenient for your timeline, wouldn't you say? Leland backed against the wall, trapped between my advancing presence and the crowd's judgment. His expensive watch, probably purchased with borrowed money, caught the light streaming through stained glass windows. I needed the money, Dad. The creditors. They were threatening. So you killed your father instead of asking for help? The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Somewhere in the back rows, someone started crying. Whether from emotion or shock, I couldn't tell. Outside, car doors slammed in rapid succession. Heavy footsteps approached the chapel entrance, moving with purpose across the gravel parking lot. Donald had arrived right on schedule. The chapel doors burst open with the force of a man on a mission. Donald strode down the center aisle, carrying a leather briefcase and the confidence of someone who'd spent 20 years dismantling fraudsters in court. His gray suit cost more than most people's cars, and every line of his body screamed serious legal trouble. Leland Marcus Howell? His voice boomed across the stone chamber with courtroom authority. My son pressed himself further against the wall, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the stonework. Yes, that's me. You're served. Donald's hand shot forward with papers that cracked like a whip in the chapel silence. Civil fraud lawsuit, criminal complaint referral, emergency asset freeze, and federal wire fraud charges. Court appearance scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The legal documents scattered across the floor like wedding confetti, but nobody was celebrating. Leland stared at the papers as if they might spontaneously combust and save him from their contents. Federal charges? Margaret Suttleson's voice rose to a squeak. What does that mean? Donald turned toward the crowd with the practiced ease of someone comfortable explaining complex legal matters to laypeople. It means Mr. Howell here committed felony fraud across state lines, forged government documents, and attempted to steal approximately $50 million through inheritance fraud. A collective gasp swept through the chapel. Several elderly relatives started fanning themselves with funeral programs. Outside, more vehicle doors slammed. Through the stained glass windows, I could see news vans pulling into the cemetery parking lot. White trucks with satellite dishes and cable company logos sprawled across their sides. How did the media find out? Leland's voice climbed toward hysteria. Donald smiled with the satisfaction of a chess player announcing checkmate. I may have contacted a few journalist friends about an interesting fraud case developing in San Francisco. Public interest, you understand. The chapel doors opened again, this time admitting a parade of reporters with cameras, microphones, and the hungry look of journalists who'd stumbled onto a genuinely fascinating story. The lead reporter, a sharp-dressed woman with silver hair, made a beeline for me. Mr. Howell, I'm Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News. Can you confirm that your son filed a false death certificate while you were alive and traveling in Europe? I can confirm that I'm standing here breathing, which makes his death certificate somewhat inaccurate. I kept my tone dry, businesslike. 30 years of corporate media training kicked in automatically. Cameras whirred and clicked as Leland tried to shield his face with his hands. The funeral atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by the carnival energy of breaking news. Mr. Leland Howell, another reporter called out, can you comment on the gambling debt allegations? Did you attempt to fake your father's death to collect inheritance money? No comment. Leland mumbled into his palms. I need a lawyer. You'll need several lawyers, Donald said cheerfully. Federal prosecutors take a dim view of death certificate fraud, especially when it involves this much money. More cameras appeared as additional news crews pushed through the chapel entrance. The funeral director, a thin man who probably dealt with weeping families rather than media circuses, stood helplessly near the altar, looking like he wanted to disappear. "Sir, we need to maintain some dignity here," he pleaded. "This is sacred space." "Sacred space where someone tried to bury a living man," Janet Morrison replied, adjusting her microphone. "I'd say that changes the rules somewhat." Leland edged toward the back exit, moving with the desperate stealth of someone hoping to escape notice. But 20 reporters with cameras made anonymity impossible. "Mr. Howell, are you fleeing the scene?" another journalist called out. The question triggered something primal in Leland's panic response. He broke into a run, pushing past surprised mourners toward the chapel doors. Cameras followed his retreat, like hunting dogs tracking prey, reporters shouting questions at his retreating figure. "And there goes our star defendant," Donald observed with professional satisfaction, "running from his own father's fake funeral. This footage should make excellent evidence for the prosecution." Through the chapel windows, I watched Leland sprint across the parking lot toward his Tesla, reporters in pursuit, like a pack of well-dressed wolves. 2 weeks later, my face stared back at me from every news channel in California. The story had legs: a tech executive, a gambling-addicted son, forged death certificates, and a funeral crash that looked like something Hollywood couldn't have scripted better. Today on Morning San Francisco, we continue our exclusive coverage of the Howell inheritance fraud case, the anchor announced from my television screen. We're joined by tech industry analyst Rebecca Martinez and criminal defense attorney David Chen. I muted the sound and leaned back in my study chair, watching the silent talking heads gesture at photos of Leland and myself. The images they'd chosen were telling: me in a confident business portrait, him in a police booking photo from 3 days after the funeral incident. My phone buzzed with the 15th interview request of the morning. CNN this time. I'd already appeared on Fox Business, Bloomberg, and 3 local news stations. The story had everything American audiences loved: family betrayal, massive money, and a twist ending that nobody saw coming. Donald walked into my study carrying 2 coffee cups and a satisfied expression. "Judge Martinez signed the asset freeze this morning. Leland can't touch a penny of company money or inheritance funds until this resolves." "How's his media strategy working out?" I gestured toward the television where they were now showing footage of Leland fleeing the cemetery. "Poorly." Donald settled into the leather chair across from my desk. His PR firm dropped him yesterday after his disastrous interview with Channel 5, claiming his father was mentally unstable from post-COVID symptoms, while you were simultaneously giving coherent interviews to business journalists. The contrast had been stark. While I'd maintained my usual corporate composure, 30 years of shareholder meetings and product launches had trained me well. Leland appeared increasingly frantic with each media appearance, sweating through expensive suits, stammering through prepared statements, looking guilty even when proclaiming innocence. "The gambling angle killed him," I said, scrolling through social media on my tablet. "Americans forgive a lot of things, but stealing from your father to pay casino debts? That crosses lines." Twitter was particularly brutal. Dead Dad Scam had been trending for a week, spawning memes and commentary from every corner of the internet. TikTok videos recreated the funeral scene with dark humor that somehow made Leland look even worse. "Speaking of which," Donald pulled out his phone, "his criminal defense lawyer called this morning. They want to discuss a plea agreement." "Afraid of going to trial?" "Terrified. The evidence is overwhelming, the media coverage makes him look like a monster, and his own actions at the funeral created perfect visual evidence of consciousness of guilt." Donald's smile held the satisfaction of a man who'd spent 2 weeks building an airtight case. "Running from your father's fake funeral while cameras roll? Prosecutors dream of evidence that clear." My laptop chimed with another email from a Hollywood agent. 3 production companies had already contacted me about film rights to the story. The irony wasn't lost. Leland's scheme to steal my inheritance might end up making me more money through movie deals than he'd ever hoped to gain. "Channel 7 wants a follow-up interview," I mentioned, scanning through message requests. "Janet Morrison thinks the public interest is still strong." "It is. This story has everything: successful businessman, family betrayal, legal drama, and a protagonist who literally rose from the dead to expose the truth. Donald leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone who understood narrative power. Plus, you're remarkably sympathetic. Hard-working father betrayed by gambling-addicted son. It writes itself. Outside my study window, Pacific Heights looked the same as always. Expensive houses hiding expensive secrets. But now I was the neighborhood's famous resident, the man who'd attended his own funeral and lived to tell about it. Trial dates confirmed for May 5th, Donald continued. 3 weeks to prepare final arguments, though honestly, we could probably win this case with the footage from the cemetery alone. And Leland's plea offer? 15 years federal prison, full restitution, permanent loss of inheritance rights. Donald's expression turned serious. It's a fair deal, considering he was looking at 25 to life on the original charges. I stared at the muted television, watching another news segment about my supposedly dead self. The anchor was interviewing Mrs. Henderson from the country club, who seemed to be enjoying her 15 minutes of fame as a funeral witness. Let him sweat until the trial, I said finally. If he wanted easy forgiveness, he shouldn't have tried to bury his father alive. The phone rang again. This time it was a call I'd been expecting. Mr. Howell, this is Alexandra Rivera from Pacific Pictures. We'd like to discuss acquiring film rights to your story. 3 weeks of preparation culminated in this moment. I adjusted my Navy business suit, the same one I'd worn to close my biggest acquisition deal 5 years ago, and walked through the metal detectors at San Francisco Superior Court. Camera flashes erupted from the media gauntlet outside, but courthouse security kept the reporters at bay. Courtroom 4 buzzed with nervous energy. Donald sat at our table, reviewing final notes, his silver hair perfectly styled for what would likely be his career's most photographed case. Across the aisle, Leland slumped beside his defense attorney, James Mitchell, looking like a man who'd aged decades in 5 weeks. All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Chen. The courtroom snapped to attention as Judge Chen entered, a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who'd presided over countless fraud cases. She surveyed the packed gallery with professional detachment before settling behind the bench. This is the matter of People versus Leland Marcus Howell, case number 2025, CR 4821. Are counsel ready to proceed? The state is ready, Your Honor. District Attorney Patricia Valdez stood with the confidence of someone holding an unbeatable hand. Defense is ready, Your Honor. James Mitchell's voice carried less conviction. Judge Chen nodded toward the prosecution table. Opening statements. Miss Valdez, you may proceed. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about greed, betrayal, and the lengths to which one man would go to steal $50 million. Valdez's voice carried throughout the silent courtroom. The defendant, Leland Howell, filed a false death certificate for his own father, while that father was alive and traveling in Europe. His motive was simple: inherit $50 million before anyone discovered his massive gambling debts. She gestured toward our table. Mr. Orrin Howell sits before you today, very much alive, because his son's plan failed, not through conscience or remorse, but because the victim refused to stay dead. Murmurs rippled through the gallery until Judge Chen's gavel restored order. We will prove that the defendant forged government documents, committed wire fraud across state lines, and attempted to defraud his father's estate of approximately $50 million. This is not a family dispute. This is criminal fraud on a massive scale. Donald rose for our civil portion. Your Honor, in addition to criminal charges, my client seeks complete forfeiture of inheritance rights and full restitution for damages caused by this fraud. Mr. Howell trusted his son with access to private documents. That trust was violated in the most fundamental way possible. James Mitchell's opening felt desperate from the first sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, my client made mistakes, but fraud requires intent to deceive, and I will show you that Leland Howell genuinely believed his father had died in Germany. Post-pandemic stress, family communication problems, and a series of unfortunate coincidences created a perfect storm of misunderstanding. The defense strategy was clear: claim confusion rather than admit calculation. Mitchell painted Leland as a confused son, overwhelmed by grief and financial pressure. making honest mistakes under stress. Mr. Howell suffered from gambling addiction, a recognized medical condition that impaired his judgment. When he received what he believed was confirmation of his father's death, he acted in good faith to handle estate matters. This is tragedy, not fraud. Judge Chen called the first witness. The state may call Mr. Orrin Howell. I walked to the witness stand with measured steps, placing my hand on the Bible for swearing in. The courtroom fell silent as I settled into the chair, looking directly at the jury, 12 faces representing justice I'd waited months to receive. Mr. Howell, Valdez began, please tell the jury where you were on April 10th, 2025. I was in Berlin, Germany, attending a technology conference, very much alive and posting updates to social media every day. And where was your death certificate filed on that same date? According to hospital records, in San Francisco, claiming I died of cardiac arrest in Munich, a city I never visited during that trip. The questioning continued methodically. My European travel receipts, hotel records, conference attendance logs, social media posts, a paper trail proving I was alive and documented when my son declared me dead. Did you give your son permission to file a death certificate? No. I gave him temporary access to handle routine business correspondence while I traveled, not to kill me on paper and collect my inheritance. Laughter rippled through the gallery despite the gravity of testimony. Cross-examination proved Mitchell's desperation. Mr. Howell, isn't it true that you and your son had a strained relationship? We had normal business disagreements, nothing that justified fraud. Your son was under tremendous financial pressure, wasn't he? Yes, from gambling debts he chose to accumulate. Could family communication failures have led to genuine confusion about your condition? I leaned forward slightly, meeting his eyes. Counselor, I was posting photos of German restaurants on Instagram while he was filing my death certificate. The only confusion was his belief that he wouldn't get caught. Applause erupted from the gallery until Judge Chen's gavel restored order. 5 weeks later, I sat in the same courtroom chair where this journey had begun, but everything felt different. The jury had deliberated for 3 days, long enough to review every piece of evidence, short enough to suggest the outcome was never truly in doubt. As the jury reached a verdict, Judge Chen's voice carried the formal weight of justice about to be served. The foreman, a middle-aged engineer who'd nodded appreciatively during my testimony, stood with papers that would determine my son's fate. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of filing false government documents, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of attempted inheritance fraud, how do you find? Guilty. Each word hit like a judge's gavel, final and irreversible. Beside his lawyer, Leland's face drained to the color of old newspaper. His hands trembled as reality settled around him like cement. On the civil matter of inheritance forfeiture, how do you find in favor of the plaintiff? Complete forfeiture of all inheritance rights, Your Honor. Donald's hand found my shoulder, squeezing once with 20 years of friendship compressed into that single gesture. We'd won everything: criminal conviction, civil judgment, complete vindication. Judge Chen consulted her notes before addressing Leland directly. Mr. Howell, please rise for sentencing. Leland struggled to his feet, requiring Mitchell's support to remain upright. The court sentences you to 3 years supervised probation, $500,000 in fines, 1,000 hours of community service, and complete forfeiture of inheritance rights, totaling $50 million. Judge Chen's voice remained steady, professional. Additionally, you are banned from any involvement in your father's business enterprises or estate management. Your Honor, Mitchell interjected, my client wishes to file an immediate appeal. That is his right, but this conviction stands pending appellate review. Judge Chen's gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in applause and shouting as reporters rushed toward the exits to file their stories. I remained seated, watching my son crumble beside his lawyer's table. 32 years of fatherhood ending in criminal conviction and permanent exile from family fortune. Donald leaned close, speaking under the courtroom chaos. It's over, Orrin. Complete victory. Justice, I corrected, not victory. Justice. We stood together, walking toward the courtroom exit where reporters waited with microphones and cameras. Outside, San Francisco sunshine felt different, cleaner somehow, like air after a thunderstorm washes away humidity. "Mr. Howell," Janet Morrison from Channel 7 pushed forward with her microphone. "How does it feel to have your son convicted of fraud?" "It feels like the system worked exactly as designed. Truth prevailed over deception, evidence over manipulation." I paused, choosing words carefully. I take no pleasure in my son's conviction, but I'm satisfied that justice was served. "What's next for you and your company?" "That," I said, "remains to be seen." Donald and I walked down the courthouse steps toward his waiting BMW, leaving behind a chapter that had begun with a death certificate and ended with a living man's complete vindication. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse plaza, where protesters and supporters had gathered throughout the trial. "Dinner?" Donald suggested as we reached his car. "I know a place that serves excellent steaks and doesn't allow cameras." "Perfect. We have business to discuss." As we drove away from the courthouse, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through 17 messages from Hollywood agents, 3 acquisition offers for my company, and one particularly interesting call from a film director named Alexandra Rivera. Time to turn legal victory into financial opportunity. The phone rang as we pulled into traffic. Unknown Los Angeles number. "Mr. Howell, this is Alexandra Rivera from Pacific Pictures. I believe we need to talk." 2 weeks after the verdict, I stood in a glass-walled conference room 30 floors above downtown Los Angeles, looking out at the Hollywood Hills, while lawyers finalized contracts that would change my life completely. Alexandra Rivera sat across from me, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who directed 3 Oscar-nominated films and understood exactly why my story would captivate audiences. "The studio is prepared to offer $2 million for exclusive film rights," she said, sliding contracts across the mahogany table. "Full creative control remains with us, but you'll have consulting privileges and final approval on the script." Donald reviewed the pages with the thoroughness that had served us so well in court, standard entertainment industry boilerplate, with unusually favorable terms for the source material owner. "Your story has everything Hollywood loves," Alexandra continued. "Family betrayal, massive financial stakes, a protagonist who literally rises from the dead to expose the truth. This practically writes itself." I signed the documents with the same Mont Blanc pen I'd used to build Howltech from nothing 25 years ago. $2 million for the rights to my family's destruction. Ironic that Leland's betrayal would ultimately make me richer than his inheritance scheme ever could have. "Production starts next year," Alexandra explained. "We're targeting an Oscar-eligible December release. This has all the elements for awards consideration." Flying back to San Francisco that evening, I reviewed the other contracts Donald had negotiated during my Hollywood trip. Tech Venture Consortium had offered $100 million for Howltech, a premium price reflecting the company's strong fundamentals and my sudden media fame. "You don't have to sell," Donald said from the seat beside me as California scrolled past below. "The company's profitable, well-managed, positioned for growth. I'm 67 years old, survived a son's attempt to kill me on paper, and just sold my life story to Hollywood." I closed the laptop and accepted a drink from the flight attendant. "It's time for a different kind of life." "What kind of life?" "Quiet, simple. Somewhere with good fishing and no casinos within 500 miles. Donald laughed, the first genuinely relaxed sound I'd heard from him since this nightmare began. "You've earned it, but I'll miss the excitement." "Visit any time. I'll cook fish we caught that morning and tell you about the one that got away." The plane descended towards San Francisco International as the sun set over the Pacific. Below, the city sparkled with lights from millions of people living their ordinary lives, unaware that somewhere above them, a man who'd been declared dead was planning his resurrection as a retiree. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, old anxiety flashed through me. Too many months of legal battles and media attention had made me paranoid about unexpected communications. The message was from Letitia Green, my elderly neighbor. "Saw you on the news again. Barney and I are so proud. The whole neighborhood is talking about your movie deal. You're our local celebrity now." I smiled and typed back, Thank you for believing in me when it mattered most. Always, dear. That's what neighbors do. 2 hours later, Donald and I sat in a quiet North Beach restaurant, celebrating victory with wine that cost more than most people's rent. Around us, other diners glanced occasionally in my direction. The man who'd attended his own funeral had become locally famous. To justice, Donald raised his glass. To friendship, I countered. Justice was just the bonus. We drank to 20 years of loyalty tested by 5 weeks of crisis and proven stronger than blood relationships. Outside, San Francisco hummed with evening energy, but inside our small corner booth, 2 old friends planned a future neither of us had imagined 6 months ago. When do you close on the company sale? Donald asked. Next Friday. Final signatures, wire transfers, press conference. I swirled wine in my glass, watching the legs slide down like liquid amber. Then I disappear. Disappear? Not literally, but I'm done being the man who caught his son stealing his inheritance. Time to become someone new. The waiter brought our check as the restaurant prepared to close. Outside, San Francisco glittered with promise and possibility, a city where people reinvented themselves daily. Tomorrow I would sign papers that transferred ownership of everything I'd built. Next week, cameras would roll on a movie about my life. Next month, I would disappear into a kind of retirement I'd never imagined possible. But tonight, I was simply a man who'd survived his son's attempt to bury him alive, emerged victorious from every courtroom battle, and earned the right to write his own ending. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.